And guess what? We are live. And let me go and post this comment now. So our little comments on the side are going to be on Facebook and on the YouTube, so people will be able to see and comment. So my name is Trish Triumph Sullivan, and I am the proprietor of Downtown Book and Sound. And I am welcoming, and thank you for being here, Katherine Yeske Taylor. And she is the author of this amazing book called She's a Badass.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm really pleased that you agreed to do this kind of late at your time, because you're joining us from New York.
That's okay. I'm a night owl.
Me too, but us artist types, right? Change my glasses so that I can see a little better with ones that actually have my prescription more. I wanted to start off really quickly saying that anyone who attends today, and welcome anyone who is watching us live right now, either on YouTube or on Facebook. Thank you for joining us as well, audience. And the audience that's here joining us is watching on the screen that away. Yeah. So they can see me, but and you both on the screen. And luckily, our audience online can see us as well. So I just wanted to say that because this is a virtual event, one of the things that we like to do is offer anyone who attends a unique and one-of-a-kind bespoke book plate signed by the author. All you have to do is email or message us here at Downtown Book and Sound, and for no charge, we will mail anywhere in the United States. And I did mail one to the UK one time, a one-of-a-kind book plate signed by the author tonight. And it will be only available to people who are watching this interview with the author. So thank you for joining us, Katherine.
Oh, thank you. And that's so cool about the book plates. I love that idea.
I really appreciate you being here with us tonight. And I'm excited about your book. And this is a very interesting compilation of stories about women in rock shaping feminism. I have to confess, I have not had a chance to read the entire book because we just got our copies in tonight, right before airtime today. So, but I'm excited to read it, and I'd like you to if we could start off just for a minute, if you could tell me a little bit about why you decided to write this book in the first place.
Well, over the years, I've been a journalist now for more than 30 years. And over the years, every time I'd talk to a woman, it seemed like it wasn't uncommon for them to tell me a story about something that had happened to them that was sexist, or, something that had really bothered them or even scared them that happened to them as they were touring around or dealing with record companies. And I felt like, in a way, being a woman in this business too, as a music journalist, we kind of had this bond because we both understood what these kind of experiences were like and just how maddening or frightening they could be. But I never really thought of doing a book until one day I got an email from a literary agent who said he had read an interview I had done with Donita Sparks of L7, and he really liked it. And he said, have you ever thought about writing a book? Because I went and looked at some of your other articles, and I think you would do a good job. And then we started talking about ideas that I could do. And he said, well, based on that interview you did with Donita, why don't you do a book about women in rock and feminism? And as soon as he said it, I knew it was a book that I could definitely do. I mean, I knew there would be enough stories out there to fill a whole book, unfortunately. And I let him take the proposal that I wrote and run with it, and we immediately got a deal. And I was just kind of amazed to discover that there wasn't already a book like this out there. I mean, there's lots of books about women in rock, of course. There's lots of books about feminism, but there isn't a book already that combines those two things, where women in rock are specifically talking about their lives and coming up through the music business and what that's like.
I've never seen anything like that, but like what you have written about, and I'm very fascinated by it. I think as a woman myself, and at the age that I am, and I've had quite a varied career in my life. I've certainly experienced quite a bit of misogynistic behavior in my life, in my different career choices, and including teaching and well, restaurant work, of course.
Yeah. Well, that's my hope, is that anyone reading this book, I mean, it's about women in rock, but so many of their stories, I mean, it could be any woman anywhere. And I don't think there's any woman out there who really hasn't encountered an instance of this at some point in her life. So hopefully people will recognize that it's kind of a universal theme. It's not just limited to women in the entertainment business, for sure.
Yeah, that was kind of my point, is that it's relatable to anybody, and especially if you're interested in rock and in music, that this is a very timely type of a book. And I'd also so we've kind of got a little start on about the book. I'd like to ask a little bit about you personally.
Okay.
Like, where are you from originally? What and are you from New York? Is your place?
No, I've lived in New York for about 12 years. Before that, I was in Georgia. I was out in California for a little while, but I consider myself a Georgian, even, no matter where I live. 12 years in New York, I'm really happy to be here, but it's where I need to be for my career, and I love it in many ways. But part of my heart is always going to be in Georgia. And I talk about it a little bit in my introduction here, about how I started off my music journalism career when I was in high school in Atlanta, and I was writing for my high school newspaper, and they wanted me to cover really boring things like student government meetings. And I refused. I said, I don't want to do that. It sounds terrible. And this is when bands like Black Crowes and Indigo Girls were really getting popular in the late 80s. And I said, I want to write about that. And the faculty advisor said, well, you can go ahead and try. But you could tell he didn't really think that I was going to be able to do it. But I was determined, 16 years old, you're kind of fearless, right? So I just called up management companies, and to my delight, once they got done kind of laughing at this kid calling up, a lot of times these people would do it. And so I am so touched that actually Amy Ray of the Indigo Girls is one of the people in this book. It really kind of feels like a full circle moment, because she's one of the first people, who was a successful artist who let me interview her. And now here she is in a book that I wrote more than 30 years later. And it's just really special. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but I'm very proud to be an ex-Georgian.
Well, you always have your home place, and I know mine's Arizona. I don't know that I ever want to live back in Arizona again, because I love it here where I'm at in John Steinbeck's hometown, Salinas, California. And I've been here like 40 years, but we still have a special place in our heart for where we're from. And you'll always have a little Georgia in you, right?
Yeah, and especially because after high school, I went over to Athens, Georgia, which, of course, still has one of the most famous music scenes in the world. And I went to journalism school at the University of Georgia there, which is a really good journalism school, and I got a good education. But really, the main reason I went is because of the music scene. And
so this sounds like a theme in your life.
Yeah.
The music scene.
Yeah. So, and then, I started interviewing bands like REM and the B-52s. And I'm just so grateful that these bands were so kind to me when I was starting off, because I was a teenager when I talked to many of them. And I probably looked like I was about 12 years old, and clearly, I'm sure, did not know what I was doing at that point. And they were very patient and kind and didn't scare me off doing this. And so here I am all these decades later. And I feel very honored and blessed to still be at this game.
Well, I'm going to say you must have a talent for journalism, because you don't get people to open up for you and to be to allow you into their personal lives, even as a teenager, right? Unless you have that special gift, I think, and you have that.
Well,
Obviously.
I think I have a lot of curiosity, and I mean, genuine curiosity. I really like meeting new people. I really like asking them questions about their lives. I truly want to know how musicians do what they do. I mean, even after all this time, um, songwriting still seems like magic to me, and someone being able to get up and play, so well in front of an audience still seems like magic to me. I respect what they do, and so I think that might be what comes across, that I'm genuinely a fan of their work. I'm not just there for my own glory. I'm not just there because it's some payday. I mean, I genuinely want to hear these stories, so I hope that comes through. And I'm honored that a couple of the women in this book mentioned to me their stories they were telling me that they'd never told publicly before,
Oh,
and
really?
that was really wonderful, that they did that, that they felt that safe. One of them spoke to me a couple of weeks ago, just before this book came out, and I wrote to all the women in it and said, heads up, the book's coming out. And she said, I've been panicking because I've been thinking about some of the stuff that I told you. I hope it's all right, But then she read the book as a whole, and she realized that her stories were not, some outlier type of thing. She didn't say anything that could be embarrassing or anything,
It'd be
but
embarrassing
I
later.
thought that was interesting.
So I'm also a huge fan of music, and I love music. I'm not musical. I don't play an instrument or sing or anything. But I love to listen to music, and I like to dance. So I have a lot of appreciation. So I'm with you in that I am a huge fan and an appreciator of pretty much everyone in this book that you've written about. It's a who's who of in rock and roll of the female. I mean, sadly, there's a couple people that are no longer with us that can't be in this book that I would have loved to have had you interview.
Yeah, I couldn't get everyone I wanted, but I got a lot of them. And I'm very touched that 2/3 of these women in this book, such as Susie Quattro and Ann Wilson and Suzanne Vega, and a number of the women in this book I'd interviewed before, and that's why they agreed to do this with me now. When I got this book deal, that's how I started off, was just calling up, the teams of the people that I have spoken with before, and just said, "Hey, remember me? And want to do that again, only longer?" Um, and I'm really honored that so many of them said that they would. And then, because of that, there were some women who I've never been able to interview before, took a look at the list of people who were already signed on, and then said they would talk to me, such as Exene Cervenka of X. That was a really big one. I was really happy to get her. Amanda Palmer. Some people that I've always been really curious about because they're so outspoken, and I knew they'd be great for this. But it's interesting because I wasn't sure, I hadn't talked to them before, so I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but it all worked out really well in the end. Thank goodness.
How did you choose? Like, what was your criteria? How did you choose these women? And was it some of it was just chance?
Some of it was chance, but I really, before I asked anybody, I kind of sat down and I made a pretty careful wish list, because I really wanted to get women across generations. I didn't want to have women only 50 and up. I didn't want to have only 40 and under. I wanted to get cross-generational perspectives, and I wanted to also get different styles of music in this. I mean, within rock music, but that's still a pretty broad range, such as, Amy Ray's folk rock. Paula Cole is, more kind of a mainstream. Joan Osborne also, more like blues rock. All these different kinds of styles. And so I really thought about it before I asked anybody about how can I get the best cross section possible in terms of age, in terms of musical styles. So, and then I threw in some people that I just knew would be really outspoken, like Cherie Currie of the Runaways, people who have legendary stories that we all know of as being trailblazers in this field, such as Suzi Quatro. I mean, she was the first one I asked, and she was the first one to say yes, and she's the first chapter in this book, and that's really meaningful because she really was such a pioneer in so many ways. And I know a lot of people in America aren't terribly familiar with her music, but she's hugely popular across Europe and Australia. But I will say that people in America probably remember her for being on Happy Days. She played Leather Tuscadero on Happy Days. And yeah.
How funny.
But yeah, she was by many measures the very first female rock star. She was the first woman who led her own band, not just as a member, not just a singer. The first one who wrote her own songs and performed them. The first one who played her own instrument. She's a virtuoso bass player. So she really led the way for so many people, and her story is just amazing. And I think it's the perfect chapter to start off this book.
The perfect opening chapter. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. My husband has a band, and his first bass player was a female.
Excellent.
Warman. She was amazing. The late Stephanie Warman, she passed away, about 5 years ago, but wonderful, talented woman that really brought a lot to the band, mm-hmm. and probably should have been leading her own band. Seriously, she made her own music, so that's part of it. But that's the kind of thing about women. I think a lot of times our voices have not been heard as much as they should be. So it takes a special kind of woman to make it in rock and roll, I'm guessing, mm-hmm. music in general.
Yeah, the emerging theme that came up in this book as I talked to people was they really had to have two things. Every single woman in this book, they're very different in every other way. Personality, attitude, musical style, but they all shared two things. And one was persistence. They didn't let things get them down and make them quit. And thick skin, because they all had stories of encountering some really bad things. Some of them had downright horrific things happen to them, assault,
no doubt.
Just really bad things. And, they were able to pick themselves up and brush themselves off and keep on going and not let that defeat them. And so I really hope that there will be young women who are just starting off in this business who, even if they don't recognize a lot of the names in this book, will want to read about these women's experiences to understand what happened in this business before them, the struggles other people have gone through in order to make things the way they are today, which still aren't perfect, but they're a lot better than they were in the 70s and early 80s for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely a lot better. Mm-hmm. I mean, things are looking up. I mean, I'm looking, as I was looking at the when we first had, we had first been contacting each other about doing an event and me, carrying your book in our bookstore. Of course, I love music, so this was like huge. And every name that was on your list of interviewees was like, wow. And of course, Ann Wilson, an amazing. I just love her music, and actually did a modern dance in high school to one of her songs.
Cool.
So, those are like a lot of these women are close to my heart in that, personally and in their contributions to the genre.
Yeah. And I hope some of the younger artists will be inspiring as well, because they're still going through their own kind of struggles. I cut it off with women in their early 30s because I wanted some women who had been around in this business long enough to have stories that would be enough to fill a chapter in this book and be a little seasoned and have some perspective. But I really think that if you haven't heard of someone in this book, go on Spotify and go on YouTube and see what you think of their work. And you might find that there are some people whose work you really like. And then you can go ahead and support them But I was doing an interview for a podcast a couple of weeks ago with a couple of young women in their 20s. And it was interesting because they really hadn't heard of almost any of these artists, but they just were interested in the topic. And they said that's what they did, is that as they were reading it, they would pull up on online, they would look these artists up and became really fans of some of them. They said, I had no idea about some of these songs, and they're great. But it was interesting because they also were infuriated hearing some of the stories for the first time, you know, like, and that was a good reminder because Ann Wilson specifically talks in her chapter about why she wrote the song Barracuda, and the fact that it came out of having a really ugly confrontation with a guy who came up to her backstage and said some really gross things to her. And it's a pretty well-known story. But I had to include it again, of course, because it's an important one.
Yeah.
And these women that were interviewing me had never heard this story. And one of them said, you know, this is the first time I heard of it, and it made me so mad that I had to put the book down and go do something else for a while because I got so angry.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I mean, not good that she got angry, but I think it's good to really have people realize what's happened and like I said, the struggles that the women who blazed that trail had to go through in order to make things much better these days.
And that's important that, you know, there's a lot of women that, you know, kind of in my age group at least, that really experience some horrible things. And anyone in the entertainment industry knows that there's a lot of other bad things that are going on with in related to women. I think it's important, and I'm glad that you talked about this with young women, realizing that, hey, this is the reality for that happened to some of us other females,
Yeah.
and that even if it hasn't happened to them, and we hope it never does, it's important for them to know that history.
And Lydia Lunch addresses this in her chapter really eloquently. I can't remember the exact quote. It's a really elegant quote, but the gist of it is, you know, she was telling young women, you can't live in this world with the attitude of you're going to go through it looking at things the way you want it to be, or the way you wish things would be. You have to look at things the way they are and confront it that way, and be brave enough to look at the reality of things. And I think she's really right about that. Nothing's really going to change if people kind of hide away from the ugly truths. But I also want to point out, and it's important to note, that a lot of these women, in fact, all of them, have stories where they talk about how men help them. I mean, this is not a male bashing book by any means. This is not a man hating exercise. It's not bitter. These women all made a very big point of saying, like, look, there's a certain kind of guy that I've really hated over the years when they've treated me this way, but I like men, and here's some examples of how they've helped. And so I think that's really important to point out too, that it's balanced that way. And I think it makes it clear that the men who do behave that way are, I think, a minority. You know, they're a very small, problematic group of people, but they're definitely not the majority. Most men are perfectly fine, and some have been extraordinarily helpful. And so I was really glad that these women really made sure to point that out as well.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you brought that up, because, you know, it's true. Like, not all guys are bad, and it's easy to start saying, like, oh, this, you know, we've been treated badly or whatever. And it happened to me plenty of times, you know, throughout my life. But I like men too, and I'm married to a wonderful one. So it's, you know, it doesn't do any good to be a hater.
Yeah, I like men too. But you know, the thing is, when I first posted I was doing this book, when I first announced this project, I did get, you know, a flurry of comments from certain people, certain guys saying, well, you're a man hater and screw you, kind of thing, you know, really hateful, like, well, you hate us, so we hate you. And I just wanted to say, you haven't read the book yet. If you read the book, you'll see it's not that way. I mean, they're pointing out times when something really hurt them or made them angry in this book, but they also make it clear that they're not angry, bitter people overall, and that's a kind of an anomaly when these things happen. So it's important to just kind of point out to people, I feel, that these things need to be brought to light, but perhaps not dwelled upon or made to seem like it's the overriding thing.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm glad that that is also kind of a theme there with you, because that's an important. Like, we don't want this to get into some kind of a culture war about us versus them, because that's not what it's about.
Yeah, and a couple of the women in this book specifically caution women against that. I think it's Susie Quatcher said that, and Cherie Currie of the Runaways both made a point of saying, like, do not demonize men. That's not going to help. In fact, it's going to harm, and it's going to lead to bad things. So I was glad that they pointed it out, because I wasn't going to lead anybody in their chapters. I went to journalism school. I take that very seriously, of being the objective messenger. Basically, I'm a conduit. My job is not to guide people or lead people or impose my opinions on anyone. My job is to tell the stories, tell their life story as they see it, tell their truth as they see it. And it's interesting because by doing that, there's a lot of contradictions in this book. I mean, some of these women really disagree with each other. I'm really curious to hear from them now, what they're going to think when they all read it, because I'd let them read their own chapters just to fact check and make sure that I wasn't taking anything out of context. But I didn't let them read each other's. Some of them asked, and I said no, because I didn't want anybody affecting anybody else. And a couple times it came up where somebody would say, oh, this is what I believe, and I can't believe anybody else would think any differently. And then in the very next interview, somebody would say, well, I think this totally opposite thing, and I can't believe anybody thinks any differently. So it's going to be a little interesting as they read each other's chapters and see how they're in opposition to each other in some ways.
Well, I also want, as I'm coming from my own background, and I look at how labels go and those kind of things, and feminism is on the cover here. Were some of the women that you interviewed like not big on like being called a feminist?
Yeah, there was a handful of them. Yeah.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Talk to that a little bit.
Well, it was kind of surprising to me because I knew the title of this book before I pitched anyone on it. I mean, you have to have a title when you pitch books to publishers, and everybody agreed that this is a good one, so I kept it. And I kind of thought that a book that was subtitled Women in Rock Shaping Feminism would mean that everybody I talk to is a feminist. But that is not, in fact, the case, as some of them very adamantly let me know. Every woman in this book believes in women's equality. They believe in equal pay for equal work. They believe in equal opportunities and all that. But not all of them want to be called a feminist as an outgrowth of that. Some women feel that it was that word has come to have negative connotations, and they feel that is because the women's movements that have transpired over the years maybe got too extreme in their opinion, took things too far, don't reflect the way that they would have approached things, and so therefore they don't want to be called feminist. And so they had some alternative suggestions that they would like to be called instead, if anything. A couple of them said, don't call me any label. I don't want to be labeled as anything at all. Lydia Lunch said she wants to be called a confrontationalist because she feels that feminist isn't radical enough. But then there's other people such as Danita Sparks of L7 and Toby Vale of Bikini Kill who said, I fully embrace that word. I'm very fiercely proud of being a feminist, and I do want to have that label applied to me. So it's really interesting. And I hope that women reading this book will find it, one woman in this book at least, who reflects their own place on that spectrum. I thought it was interesting because I guess I didn't realize just how broad the range of opinions on that could be. But I thought that it makes the book much stronger and probably reflects society as a whole much better compared to what my original kind of narrow, I would say ignorant vision of this was when I started out.
Yeah, I wouldn't maybe say ignorant, but maybe like fresh. Well, seriously, because you're learning something, and lifelong learning. Just because you've already been to school or whatever doesn't mean that you don't have more to learn. And I find I teach, so I learn from my students all the time. And it's great to learn new things. And when we have a book like this where there's some very divergent views, I guess I should say, on the same subject, that's kind of cool. And it's good, and it's important for us to hear each other. I mean, I don't think of myself as a feminist either. I think more of myself as being someone who's just for women. Like, hey, we're our own tribe in a way.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I came out of this project much more knowledgeable, for sure. I mean, this really taught me a lot. I mean, I learned a lot from all these women. And even the ones I don't agree with, when I went through their life story, I could understand why they would have the perspectives that they do. There's no way that everyone's going to agree with everyone in this book because there are opposing opinions in it. But I think it's good to read about people who do have the opposite opinion from yourself, because it might teach you something. And I'd like to be open to that. So I hope that people reading this will be too.
I agree with you there. It's important to be open to other people's viewpoints, and that's part of how you learn new things, right?
Yeah.
So I hope people take that to heart when they're reading this, because I'm excited to read it myself. I'm bummed I didn't have a chance to read it before our time today. I'm trying to make sure I'm holding it up right. So and every single person that you've written about here is someone that I admire, and in different ways. And we've just lost a woman in rock. I'm going to say folk rock, right? Because Melanie just passed. Did you ever have a chance to interview her?
No, I did not. No, I wish. I've managed to interview some of. I've interviewed Joan Baez.
Oh wow!
I've interviewed some of the women who I've interviewed Judy Collins. I've talked to some of the women who really blazed a trail for women in this business, and I'm really honored. If I had my way, I'd interview everybody. I mean, my wish list is so long. It's it's unending.
You might have to do a sequel to this, right?
Yeah, well, I don't know. People keep asking if I'm going to do a second one, but I'm not sure, because I feel like the breadth of opinions and experiences that I got in this was so broad that I feel like maybe I did it. I mean, I'm going to pat myself on the back a little and say that maybe I got the people a good representation with this one. And I fear that if I did a second one, it would be kind of redundant, because as I was getting up into the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th interviews for this book, I started hearing some of the same kinds of stories again, which to me tells me that I'm starting to cover it adequately. You know what I mean? So, I mean, there's no way to capture every single opinion and experience under the sun, but I hope that I did a good job with this one, and maybe this will be the definitive version. We'll see.
Version. Yeah, let's see. I hold it up here so you guys can see it. So I'm what tell me that, I mean, I really am curious. So you said you started as a journalist and as a teenager.
Yeah.
Was there something in your life that like really like got you into that point where you felt like you wanted to talk to people and tell their stories and share their stories?
I don't know about journalism specifically. I ever really had in mind until I started writing for the school paper, but I was always a writer. I mean, my parents always told me as soon as I started learning to spell, I was constantly writing. I was always writing notes and like giving them to them, like I was always writing letters, which is a weird thing for a kid to do, I guess, living in the same house as them. But I guess I was practicing, I wanted to express myself. I recognized that this was a really good way for me to communicate, and be able to really say exactly what was on my mind, that in a way that you can't really when you're talking. When you're writing, you can really polish it. You can get it exactly perfect so that you can know that you're expressing precisely what you mean. And I really like that about writing. And then as far as the music journalism part of it, I started off taking lots of vocal lessons. I wanted to be an opera singer for a while. I took lessons for years. I took guitar lessons. I really enjoyed those things, but it became clear that I didn't have whatever that certain thing is that you need in order to succeed as a professional musician. It's this kind of indefinable quality, talent mixed with something else. And I just didn't have it, no matter how much I practiced my guitar, I was never going to get better than this certain plateau. So I wanted to find a way to combine music with something, and it just was a natural fit to combine music and writing, these two things that I loved, in a way that I could be around people who do the music that I love, but still do the writing that made me feel fulfilled. So,
Well, that's great. So you're definitely a storyteller from the beginning.
yeah, definitely. I actually lettered in that in high school. We had a debate team that kind of had a subset of a storytelling, and we would go to different high schools around the state, and you'd be assigned a story. There was this big book of like 1,000 different stories, and they would last minute kind of give you 15 minutes to glance over this story and be able to go and tell it in front of a panel of judges. And that was really good for me to kind of think on my feet like that and get used to public speaking and everything, and being able to craft a story, beginning, middle, end, the arc in a certain set period of time. And I think that really helped me as a writer. But yeah, I think that is at the heart of every writer, whether you're a journalist, novelist, any kind of writer. You have to want to tell stories. In this case, I'm really honored that there's 20 women who trusted me with their life stories, because it doesn't really get much more personal than that, right?
That's so exciting. I mean, I'm so happy for you to have this opportunity to do what you love and be successful at it. Like, kudos to
Oh,
you.
thank you. Well, I mean, I still write articles all the time, and I really love it. But I have to say that having a book come out is special. I mean, that feels different to me than any other thing I've done as a journalist. Being able to hold that book in my hands, and it just feels more real somehow than an article that's going to go up online or be in a magazine. So while I'm still, very active as a day-to-day music journalist with the articles, this book is really special, and I'm glad that it's being so warmly received so far. I mean, it just came out last week, and the first printing sold out. That's why it was kind of delayed getting to you. We had to do a second printing quick, so that's a really good sign, and I'm really proud of that. I'm glad that the work paid off, and I'm glad that these women's stories are getting out there and getting told.
With a title like "She's a Badass," I mean, like, that's
Yeah, most people like it. Some people don't. Some people are very careful, certain to come up and tell me that they don't like it, but most people seem to like it.
well. All I have to say is it inspired me to carry your book, because you know what, we have to be a little bit of a badass to see sometimes, you know.
Well, in this day and age, you have to get people's attention, and that's what I tell, the couple of people who are a little offended that, it's a mild cuss, right?
Hey, what can I say? My older brother told me that that he was sad that I talk like a sailor. And for me, this is that it is very mild.
Yeah, it seems mild to me too, but I get it that it could offend some people's sensibilities, and I'm sorry for that. But I also knew that. Well, actually, there was one publisher that I spoke to who didn't like the title, and I didn't go with them for that reason. And it's not because I'm so precious about this title I came up with, but it was more the fact that I thought, if they're offended at this title, they're definitely going to be offended by the kind of stories I know these women are going to tell me. I mean, like I said, I've been doing these interviews for decades now, and I had some sense of what kind of can of worms I was opening with this book going in. And so I just knew this is not the right publisher for me, because if they're kind of clutching their pearls over this title, what are they going to think when I talk to somebody who's really had something terrible happen to them, and they're really being vulnerable by opening up and telling me about the fact that they were assaulted, the fact that they were threatened in a really scary way. I wanted to be able to tell these stories without feeling like I had any kind of filter, so that it could be very honest, even if it's painful or uncomfortable to read about it.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you were able to do what you've done. I mean, this is amazing. Like I said, I can't wait to read it in its entirety.
I definitely want to hear your take on it when you're done.
I'll let you know for sure. At the time, and I'm thinking that we should probably open up for some questions from anyone who is watching at the moment, including the audience here. So I'm gonna, let me type in really quick too, because anyone who's watching live on Facebook or YouTube can actually make a comment, and we will see it here on our little live stream, and I can pass it along, and we can respond.
Okay.
So.
Well, while you're doing that, I just want to reiterate your wonderful book plate deal here. Anybody who orders a book through Downtown Book and Sound, they will create a book plate, which is essentially a sticker that I will sign, and then you can put it in your book, and that will be a design that is unique to this event. It's the only time I'm going to be signing anything like that. So get a hold of them or mention in the comments that you want that, and make sure to take advantage of that, because I think that's really cool that you do that you create artwork specifically for the authors like that. That's such a cool idea. Well, I love that.
It's the talent that I have that I can share. I'm not a writer or anything else, but I do art, and I have a bookstore, so here I am.
I think that's cool.
So we have a question. Hang on a sec.
Okay.
Is there an author or a journalist that you were inspired by?
So I don't know if you could hear or not, but is there an author or a journalist that you were inspired by, or a particular one specifically?
Yeah, growing up, David Frick of Rolling Stone. I wanted to be him. He's one of the best music writers out there. Everyone, when I tell them that, they seem to think that I should say a female writer, and I suppose I should. But the truth is, I didn't really notice whether someone was a male writer or a female writer when I was reading Rolling Stone and other magazines growing up. I just noticed that I really liked their writing style. And he, like me, you can tell, is just a genuine music fan, just truly loves music in a very heartfelt way, and it comes through in his writing. And since I've moved to New York, I've I've met him a couple of times. I don't think he'd remember, but I was excited to meet him and tell him thank you for being an inspiration to me. And he seemed a little uncomfortable, like, a little shy. I think he was pleased, but also like, I don't know what to say to that. But it made me happy to be able to tell him that. So.
Well, and I think it's very special for people when they're able to hear that they've been a mentor in some way or an inspiration to another person. So well, I'm glad that you had that experience to be able to to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm looking. I don't see anything on social media.
That's cool.
Do you have other questions here?
Just if there's a passage in the book that she wants to read.
Oh, that's a great not question, but request is, do you have a passage that you would like to share with us tonight?
Let me see.
And looking, I'm going to say something about the book plate thing. It's not just anyone who buys a book from us particularly. I don't care where you bought your book from. If you saw this interview or you participated in some way and you would like to request a book plate, we will mail at Downtown Book and Sound in beautiful historic downtown Salinas. In fact, we're in a historic building right here. It was built in 1875, and we've got some original bricks, right behind me, right. And we're the home of John Steinbeck, who's a very famous writer and journalist as well. And if you haven't read any of his journalism stuff, I recommend that you take a look at American Americans, which collects a lot of his essays that he wrote and journalistic pieces. So anyway, that's the plug for that. But I just wanted to make sure you guys all know that no matter where you buy a copy of She's a Badass, if you watch this and you want a unique, cool book plate that nobody else is going to have, just message us here at Downtown Book and Sound or email downtownbookandsound@gmail.com. So
cool.
Now,
I pulled up my introduction. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll just read the first couple of pages, just because it would be weird for me to read one of the other women's life stories. But I do start off with my own story. And
oh, good.
I think that it's I resisted this. My literary agent insisted that I do this when I wrote the book proposal. I didn't want to do it. He said, you have to, or I'm not pitching this around, because you have to show why you should be someone writing this book. Like, what gives you the authority to write this book? And I saw his point. I still didn't want to do it, but I wrote it. And then when I got the book deal, the publisher said one of the reasons they decided to give me a deal is because they liked my introduction and they liked that I showed my own story and my own understanding of this topic. And as they were telling me that on the Zoom call, my agent was like, see, I told you so, So the upshot is I had to include it in this book, whether I wanted to or not. So the first half of the introduction is me telling my own story. And then the second half is me explaining why I wrote this book. But I'll just read this really quick. It's just a couple of pages.
Oh, perfect.
So when I was 16 years old, I signed on as a staff writer for my suburban Atlanta high school newspaper and was horrified to discover that they expected me to cover things like student government meetings. Boring. Instead, I asked if I could interview well-known musicians like what I read in Rolling Stone, since I was old enough to scrape up enough allowance money for a subscription. Sure, if you can get anyone to do it, the faculty advisor said. It was clear he thought I could not. My obsession with music fueled my determination. Swallowing my fear, I started cold calling band management offices. At that time, in the late 1980s, Atlanta's music scene was particularly vibrant. Hometown acts the Black Crowes and Indigo Girls had recently become international stars. Fortunately for me, they and other artists found it hilarious that some kid wanted to interview them for a high school newspaper, so they'd often agree to do it. I didn't care that they were so amused. I still wanted to ask them about how and why they did what they did, because music seemed like some kind of mysterious magic to me, and still does. Besides writing those articles, I also became a regular at Trackside Tavern and Little Five Points Pub, two of the main bases for Atlanta's flourishing acoustic singer-songwriter scene. Unlike most music venues, which enforced an 18 and up policy, the bartenders at these two places ignored my underage status as long as I didn't try to sneak any alcoholic drinks. My favorite female singer-songwriters, Dee Dee Vogt, Wendy Bucklew, Natalie Farr, and Caroline Aiken, eventually took me under their wing, making sure that I was shielded from older men or women in the room that otherwise might have tried to harass me. And then I go on and talk a little bit about going to Athens, and then I'll just say a little bit more. I got my big break when I started writing for Creative Loafing, Atlanta's weekly alternative newspaper, which I had obsessively read cover to cover for years. It was a hard-won achievement. I had called the music editor every Thursday afternoon for 6 months straight, begging him to give me a chance. Finally, the week before my 20th birthday, he relented and gave me the first of what turned out to be many assignments. But my excitement soon turned to bewilderment and then infuriation when I heard that several male writers on staff were saying that I must be getting assignments because I'd slept with the editor. One particularly snarky writer even asked me to my face if I wrote my own articles. I wanted to shout about the years of work I'd already done. I was certain that a young male writer in the same position would be praised as a go-getter instead of receiving such degrading treatment. And then I go on to talk a little bit more about my experience. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. That what I was trying to get across is that, you know, I can really relate to some of the stories that the women in this book were telling me, because it's not just the musicians, it's the journalists, the A&R reps, the publicists, you know, any woman in this business. And as you pointed out at the beginning of this, any woman in life is probably going to encounter some treatment specifically because they're women. And it was kind of interesting, just as a side note, sometimes somebody would tell me a story and I would say, well, how do you know that that bad treatment was specifically because you're a woman? How do you know that this promoter wasn't just a schmuck in general? You know, somebody who would treat someone badly in any up-and-coming band, male or female. And it was interesting to hear what they had to say about how they knew specifically that it was because of their gender, you know, be it some kind of insulting pet name, or they literally were grabbed, or something that, you know, clearly would not happen to a young man in their position. So I think it's interesting.
It wouldn't be grabbing a man, right?
No. Definitely not.
Is that so? Well, not funny. I mean, really, but yeah, that's some powerful stuff.
Yeah, and as I was pitching women on this book, you know, I sent them my introduction, and a couple of them said that was why they signed on, because they figured I would be able to relate to them and I wouldn't judge them when they were telling me stories. And so, okay, I'll admit to my agent that he was right. And it was important to put that in, but it still does make me feel a little bit weird. I'm used to being the one behind the scenes. And in fact, it makes me crazy when a journalist inserts themselves in the story unnecessarily. You know, we've all read articles where someone said, I was sitting with Mick Jagger at this dinner table, and it makes me insane because I'm thinking, we know you were there. You don't have to say that. The fact that you're describing the scene tells us you were there. You don't have to rub our noses in it. So it feels a little weird to me to put myself in this book, but I guess I see the logic now.
Well, yeah, you have to a little bit, right? I mean, it is your book. You did the writing. That's a big accomplishment. I mean, regardless that you've been a journalist all these years, I mean, putting a book together is freaking huge.
Thank you.
So, you know,
it's been 2 years in the works, so I am glad to have it in my hands finally.
She's a badass. Right.
Thank you so much.
Oh wait, we have a question
Well,
or a comment.
Yeah, I'd just like to give you a few stickers to mail to her of small female bands that I like a lot.
So we have a local music.
Also, I'd like to email her the story about a female musician who once thanked me for not groping her at their show.
Okay, so yeah, he'd like to share with you the story about a female musician who actually thanked him about for not groping her after a show.
Wow.
Well, I will promise.
That tells you just how pervasive that problem has been.
Well, no kidding. It's like, hey, well, thank you for not groping me, right?
Yeah, some people have asked me what the most infuriating story in this book is for me, and I think I have to say that it has something kind of to do with that, where Sade Sanchez, who's the final chapter in this book, which means she's the youngest, which means the least amount of stuff should be happening to her, but was talking about, having a confrontation with a sound man who had treated her badly during a show. He got physical with her, and she's the one who ended up getting kicked out of the club. And much like the young woman I described earlier who had to put the book down and go do something else, I just was beside myself. I can't think about that right now. It makes me too mad.
Yeah, it's too much. You got to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, yeah. So Chris Fletcher, who's the young man who's on to send you some stickers, is our huge stickers of all girl bands here in our local Monterey Bay region of California, which is the Central Coast. So I will pass those along to you, but he's a huge music supporter, and he's someone who I'm mentioning right now because he likes to go and buy CDs and stickers from local bands and then share them with other people.
Excellent.
As gifts. And because of that, I discovered all these great bands that I probably never would have heard because they're not necessarily on the radio. Oh yeah. So here's one sticker he wants to send you. Is
cool. Yeah, I love hearing about new bands, and especially bands with women in them, just because I, really do try to champion that stuff when I can. And so that's great. And please tell him, thank you for being a good ally.
Well, we need more allies in the entertainment, especially in music, because, music's a universal language that speaks to us even across generations and across time in a lot of ways, but across genders too.
Yes.
So we by being able to share music, and especially music by women is pretty special.
Yeah.
And then sharing these stories is really special because there's some badass women out there.
There are. I found 20 of them, and there's millions more. So,
millions more. Well, I think we are probably about done for the evening, and I appreciate you greatly for
thank
joining
you
us tonight. I am so excited to read this book. I am bummed I wasn't able to do it before our interview because I feel like I wasn't able to ask as many really penetrating questions maybe if I had read it beforehand. But I'm excited to do it, and I will do so, and I will be posting some comments and sharing some feedback with you very soon.
Great. I'd love to hear it. Yeah. And thank you so much for carrying my book in your store. I'm so honored that you and other, I made a point of reaching out to indie bookstores when I got closer to the publication date, because I really feel it's important that not only just for buying books, but as a community hub.
Well, and it is, bookstores are we are community. I mean, we also not only are sharing books and writing and literacy, but we're sharing music on a regular basis. So we fit right in with the whole thing. So thank you. If I hadn't got that email from you, I probably wouldn't have we probably wouldn't be here right today. So
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Reaching out, because as one woman to another, like, we got to stick together and like happen, right? So we got some girl power.
Great.
And so continue your badass work here, because I want to hear more from you, and I can't wait to read more of your work. So
thank you.
So thank you for joining us tonight, and I look forward to your book and your continued success.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and a real honor to do this. I really appreciate it.
And
thank you.
Everyone who's watching, let's give a big round of applause for Katherine Yeske Taylor for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Very much. And we're going to sign off on this recording, but it will be available later on to watch. So everyone, I'm Trish Triumph Sullivan from Downtown Book and Sound, and joining me tonight is Katherine Yeske Taylor with her book,
She's a Badass, Women in Rock Shaping Feminism.
Yeah. And so we're going to sign out, and we will see you guys soon.